Breaking right now, life or death. The jury, deliberating for hours, has now reached a verdict in the sentencing retrial of Jodi Arias, a jury deciding whether she will be sentenced to death or spend the rest of her life in prison for the 2008 murder of her then boyfriend, Travis Alexander. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Kleffler in New York. We are awaiting the verdict to be read inside that Arizona courtroom, and as soon as the judge does make their way up to the bench there and we find that we are closer to that, we will bring that to you live. Let's go inside now to the courtroom and listen to some of the proceedings that are going on.
Votes have been steady since last Thursday. Jurors have indicated minds are made up. Some have indicated we either let you know today or they want off this jury. In my assessment, we are hung, and additional time will not change this. Submitted by the foreperson. This morning I received an additional juror question indicating the status is unchanged as of this morning. Is there anything from the foreperson to add at this time? All right, at this time, the court is declaring a mistrial. Are we ready to proceed to sentencing?
Your Honor, Ms. Arias is requesting approximately 30 days. My understanding from our previous conversations is April 10th was available to the court. I just don't think we had a time indicated from the court.
And April 10 will not work for the state. The next of kin have requested that the sentencing be set either on a Monday or a Tuesday.
All right. I will certainly accommodate that request. April 13th or April 14th? Mr. Martinez, do either of those work?
Either one will work for us. Let's go with April 13th.
Mr. Nermi, April 13th?
Your Honor.
April 13th, 8:30 a.m. for sentencing.
What time, Your Honor?
8:30. It is ordered that a pre-sentence report be prepared. And I'm going to order the defendant held pursuant to Rule 7.2, which I believe she's already being held.
Your Honor, it's my understanding that Ms. Arias is either waiving her right to a pre-sentence interview and or requesting that counsel be present when said interview is taken. I'd like the minute entry to reflect that.
Well, which is it? Does she want a pre-sentence report or does she not?
My understanding is she's decided not to participate in said interview.
Ms. Arias, you have a right to have a pre-sentence report prepared. Your attorney is indicating you wish to waive that right. Is that correct?
Yes.
We will so reflect. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the parties, myself and my staff, I wish to thank you for your extraordinary service on this case. The admonition is lifted. You are free to talk about the case or not talk about it as you wish. I will be back shortly to personally thank you for your service. Thank you. You are excused.
Not on behalf of the state.
We're adjourned.
The jury deadlocked in the sentencing trial of Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias convicted for the 2008 stabbing death of her then boyfriend. She was convicted in 2013, found guilty in 2013. And unfortunately, at that point, there was a mistrial in the sentencing phase of that trial, and now a second trial had just been held. But as we just heard right there, that jury deadlocked as well. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, to talk about this. Dan, obviously, this is a surprise now. This now the second attempt?
No. I think I've always said from the beginning
that I didn't think that they should waste the time and effort to retry just the penalty phase, even if they had reached a verdict. But look, the death penalty, particularly in a case like this, where the jurors haven't heard the evidence about actual guilt, they're just hearing the evidence that here's why she was convicted. Now you decide what penalty she should get. And you have this weighing of aggravating circumstances versus mitigating circumstances, which are kind of squishy. I mean, you know, when you talk about sort of the mitigating circumstances, that she's remorseful and that she has post-traumatic stress disorder, and the aggravating circumstances are the cruelty of the crime here, et cetera, you know, it doesn't become a question of did she do it or not when you're debating something like what should be the penalty for this kind of crime, particularly when the jurors didn't even hear all of the evidence related to the guilt phase. It's just not that surprising.
The jury deliberations far longer of those in the first sentencing phase. Earlier in the week, in fact, the jury was given those impasse instructions. So, as you point out, not entirely clear as well. And then also when you look at the actual structure and the content that was being presented to this penalty jury, that this kind of a result might occur. So does the jury, it is a unanimous jury verdict that must be reached in Arizona, correct?
Correct. They needed a unanimous verdict, and without that, what happens now is it goes to the judge, and the judge will either decide life without parole or life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. But there is no more retrial. That's it. And remember, Arizona is only one of a couple of states where they could have even retried the penalty phase of the case. In most states, it would have automatically been a life sentence already. So now it goes to the judge, and you heard there them talking about the fact that Jodi Arias is not going to participate in the pre-sentencing report. You know, what does that mean? It means she's throwing in the towel. She's basically saying, you know what, I'm getting life anyway, I'm not getting the death penalty, and I'm not going to participate.
So we didn't see Arias take the stand this time. Why was that decision made?
Because she was totally incredible on the stand. I mean, you know, it was a smart decision. Look, I thought Jodi Arias was a pretty good witness when she testified as a witness, except for the fact that her testimony didn't make sense. So she lost credibility, I think, with the jurors in the first case by having testified. Now, you could make an argument that not having to talk about guilt or innocence in this case would have made it more likely she takes the stand, because she can just talk about why she shouldn't be executed. She decided not to. Her lawyers probably advised her against it because it seems pretty clear that the jurors in the first case didn't believe her.
Dan, I want to ask you then, lastly, before we let you go then, you said Judge Sherry Stevenson, she will then be in charge of actually handling the next step in this procedure, correct?
Correct. So now the judge makes the decision. Now that the jury's hung a second time, under Arizona law, it's immediately a life sentence, and it goes into the hands of the judge.
And so when you look at this, then, the jury did not take this 18-day testimony, correct? I mean, as far as taking into consideration.
Correct, meaning that she didn't testify in this case, and all they get to see in this case is what they testified about in this case. So she didn't testify here. They presented a number of days of testimony about the crime itself. That's what these jurors knew about it.
All right, ABC's Dan Abrams. Dan, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I want to bring in our Ryan Owens, joining us on the phone from Dallas. Ryan, you covered this case extensively. You spoke with Arias in an hour-long interview during her previous sentencing phase. How did she come across as you've been watching this now?
Well, of course, we didn't get to see her much at all during the retrial, but she has been pretty stoic throughout. I mean, Dan talked about her 18 days on the stand last time. I've covered a lot of trials. I've never seen anything close to that. I mean, for more than 2 weeks, she was just up there telling her life story and talking all about Jodi. And one reason I think that the defense went with a different tack this time around is that the impression a lot of us had in that courtroom was that Jodi just wanted to talk all about Jodi, and that she came off as narcissistic and that she was crying as much for herself and the position she finds herself in now as she was for what she did to Travis Alexander. So that was the impression that was left with a lot of us that were in the gallery during the first trial. I can't help but believe, and actually I know that's the case because we interviewed a number of the jurors from the first trial. They felt the same way, Dan.
Now, during the trial, she said that she'd rather die than spend the rest of her time in jail. When it got close to the sentencing phase, though, what changed?
Your guess is as good as mine. What goes on inside Jodi Arias' head is something I gave up trying to figure out a long time ago. But yeah, you're right. She claimed that it would be too hard on her family to have her put to death. And you may remember she had a rambling speech to the jury about how she still had a lot of good she could do in her life and how she could grow out her hair and donate her hair to cancer victims and things like that. Everything that this young woman has said from the beginning of this case, since the murder all the way back in 2008, 7 years ago, is straight up bizarre, and there's no question about it. And she's lied about so many things and has from the beginning that, like I said, I gave up a long time ago trying to figure out what's actually truthful that comes out of her mouth.
ABC's Ryan Owens with us on this. Ryan, thank you for that. We appreciate this. You can keep up to date with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starting the story for exclusive updates on the go. For now, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York.